One of the recurring questions was the perimeter where it should be? Now, you two were both there. I know you were both up on the roof of AGR. I've been in constant conversation with the people who run the AGR. They didn't know on July 13th that their whole area was something that was going to be just overrun with people. So the question was, and to me it's always the same thing, every time there's a failure you look at, it's the failure to prepare that causes the failure, ultimately. You two, with your expertise and having been there and both being on that roof, when I first walked on the, not when I first walked on the grounds, but whenever Eli and I walked on the grounds when Homeland was there, the first thing Eli said to me as we started to go across the open area is, who was in the water tower? What sniper was in the water tower? And I said, you know what, I have no idea that there was anybody in the water tower. As you've pointed out, and I've heard too many times, that the reason we didn't have people on the roof of the AGR, it was too hot that day. Well, it wasn't too hot for Thomas Crooks. The fact that we weren't there allowed him to be there. Now, as I said earlier when we opened the whole conversation, we are going to have a second chance to do the right thing and correct the failures of July 13th. The president has decided that he is going back to this site. And I think we know him well enough. He defies any type of logic when it comes to, sir, we're concerned about your safety. And his answer is always the same thing. I'm committed to serving the people of this country. Nobody puts themselves in that position that I've ever been around before. You all served that way, but to me it's astounding that this gentleman is ready to go back to a place where he almost lost his life. I don't think my wife would allow me to do that. Apparently his family, and they've gone through a lot, are going forward with this. But I want you to, because of your expertise, because Eli was the first one to say that. Who was on the water tower? Where was the perimeter? Who tried to put that whole game together? And we found from our first panel today, there was very little coordination. They couldn't talk to each other. They didn't have the ability to communicate. So from the standpoint that you've all been in and looking at where we are, and so everybody understands this as I look at this. This is the AGR building. The water tower is right here. The president was down here. So where should the perimeter have been? Because apparently they thought it was here. That's what was set up, because we had people in this area. We didn't have anybody back here, not from Secret Service. We did have private law enforcement. This whole area was under construction. There was no easy way in or easy way out of this site. On that day, everything that could go wrong apparently went wrong. Going forward, October 5th, where should the perimeter be?
Mr. Chairman, I'll tell you that any counter sniper, or anyone from the military can tell you that the high ground and the highest vantage point is where you want to be. The thing that Eli and I had talked about, Representative Crane, when we looked at the water tower, we actually walked over and tried to view whether or not it was even accessible to begin with. But what I had also noticed is that right behind the water tower was a very well manicured cut path that goes through the woods all the way down to the intersection that intersects between where the entrance to the fairground was and the AGR building's main street. Very permissible, without any magnetometers or any of the actual capabilities of security that would have actually allowed someone to go in there basically unfettered. In my personal opinion, when you establish the perimeter, you look at what actual risks exist. The Kubota dealership is obviously somewhere that I would have actually have had someone stationed to ensure they couldn't access the building. The AGR building would have been a vantage point that I would certainly have looked at 150 yards. Also, to the 9 o'clock of the stage, there was a tremendous amount of multiple buildings and structures who also had a vantage point, direct line of sight to the stage itself. But you would have essentially have looked at what are the actual capabilities of a professional shooter. And I want to echo one thing, if I may, Mr. Chairman, by Representative Crane. When we talk about the fact that not even the risk of an actual trained sniper or someone who has an understanding of long-range distance shooting, but an actual assault team who could have very easily, that fence line that you're pointing at for the AGR building is approximately 100 yards direct line of sight to the stage with no blockage in either the visual or any additional security with an actual screening or anything like that. So you could have had a guy walk up, or a team of individuals, with a bag with an assault rifle or other capabilities, who could have easily have come to that line. And Eli and I have discussed this with also Eric Prince. They could have basically done a 5-man, 7-man, 10-man line right there to have opened fire with assault weapons and created a kill box right there on top of that stage. And you're talking 100 yards. That's what most people utilize as their original dope, which is their original 0 for their rifles. So very capable for almost any rifle, and you actually have some special operations teams who do very well with a pistol at even 100. So the fact is that all of the AGR building should have been secured. They should have had full-time watch on that road that leads into the AGR building, which, as you know, comes into the main area and then loops around to a back parking lot. I would have had a law enforcement officer, Secret Service agent, checking every single person who was parking there to ensure that they were an employee of AGR and not like the white van or others who were able to be permitted into there with complete access, not knowing what was capable. But also, let's note one thing that we haven't mentioned here, which is these sophisticated explosive devices that was also found. This is what also Representative Crane and I talked about was problematic, because even some of the EOD teams talked about the sophistication of this device, which makes me also look further into the fact that Thomas Crooks was not acting alone. And a multi-channel detonator or transmitter is a pretty sophisticated thing that you don't just go ahead and find online. So there's more that needs to be uncovered, but I would tell you without unequivocally, and I'll let my colleague also determine whether he feels the same, the entire AGR perimeter, a positioning at the Kubota dealership to the 12 o'clock of the stage, as well as for the outlying buildings to the 9 o'clock of the stage, which were multiple buildings, should have all been covered and should have all have ensured that there was no advantage point to get to the president for line of sight.
Mr. Crane, any additional?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think one of the things that I said in my opening statement needs to be said again. When you look at this site and all the threat profiles that surround this site, sir, I don't think the event should have ever been held there. There's just way too many buildings, rooftops, windows, trees that a potential assassin could have posted themselves up in. So I think that's number one. As far as when you talk about some of your more conventional assassination attempts with long-range rifles, most of your snipers, counter snipers who have any legitimate training whatsoever are more than capable out far past 1,000 yards. But let's just say we put that perimeter at 1,000 yards. That's one thing to consider. But the other thing I think that's important to point out, sir, is that modern warfare has changed dramatically, and we need look no further than some of the warfare going on with Ukraine and Russia right now. One of the biggest threats to the president, and this is why I keep talking about the fact that nobody that has attempted to assassinate the president has been a professional. But with drone warfare, sir, attacks could be launched at any president, any candidate from miles away. And if we can't stop a 20-year-old kid with no military experience who gets within 150 yards of the president with an AR-15 and then gets off several shots at the president, I have very little faith that we'd be able to stop a coordinated drone attack along with assault teams and snipers. And so that's one of the things that I want to continue to harp on. One of the things Dan Bongino told us, Mr. Chairman, is that the Secret Service, while he was there, was allergic to innovation. They were allergic to, any attempt to keep, their security systems appropriate and relative to the threats that modern warfare present. Dan Bongino even said that it took them decades, sir, to even start using slings on their primary weapons. Anybody who's ever, been in law enforcement on a SWAT team or in the military that has a primary and a secondary weapon knows that if you don't have a sling, sir, and you have to transition to your secondary weapon, what are you going to do with that gun? You're just going to throw it on the ground or give it to somebody? What if you have to climb a ladder? What if you have to do prisoner handling? And so if it took the Secret Service decades to even implement such basic, gear transformations, it's very concerning that they're going to be able to handle some of these modern threats that are now very likely as modern warfare has adapted.
No, thank you. You know, I'm aware of this whole area for trying to figure out where I am in life. About 60-some years, I know this area. As you just pointed out, and we've talked about before, one of my main concerns when I found out this was going to be the place, I said, this is going to be almost impossible for safety and security. At this moment, though, I want to turn around and have Ms. Laura Lee, why don't you take 5 minutes to ask our panel the questions you